Recording in progress.
Hi, good evening. I'm calling the meeting of the Carpinteria Valley Water District to order. Can we have the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Bob, can we have the roll call? By the way, do we have council or is council online? Okay. All right.
Yes, I'm Monique Vieira. I'm counsel joining via Zoom.
Director Holcomb?
Here.
Director Johnson?
Here.
Director Roberts?
Here.
Director Balch?
Here.
Director Van Wingerden?
Yes.
All right, all are present.
Then we got item number 3, public forum. Any person may address the board of directors on any matter which is jurisdiction which is not on the agenda. Lisa, anything? Okay. Then we move on to item number 4, approval items. 4A, minutes of the regular board meeting held on September 13, 2023.
Holly motions for approval.
I'll second that.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Then a roll call, please.
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Wingerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Then we got item number 4B, disbursement report for August 16, 2023 to September 15, 2023.
Polly will move for approval.
President Van Wingerden. I apologize, Polly. I just have one item to point
Oh,
out.
sorry, Norma.
Thanks, Nora.
Sure, and that's on packet page 10, halfway down the page, City of Santa Barbara. It's a fourth quarter Cater treatment plan for $482,000. Of that, $110,000 is due from Montecito. So the district share is only $372 of that amount.
Only.
Well, yeah, that's right, the word.
Well, yeah, I always like that pointed out, though.
Okay.
Matt will move for approval.
Second. We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any roll call, please?
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Can I ask one question? I missed this before. Why is the Edison bill so high this month, 44,000? Isn't it usually less than that?
I can't answer that. I'd have to look at the individual bills, but we can have an answer for you.
Yeah, it's 14,000 for El Caro. I didn't think we were pumping much water out of the ground.
Yeah, we the way our groundwater production works is we set targets for the fiscal year, the water year, and the calendar year. You know, in other words, a cumulative target, and so we work towards those. So whenever we can pump, that it makes sense to pump, we will pump. And so this could have just been, you know, there was a 2-week or 3-week period where it made sense for El Caro to be running.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank
Right,
you.
it's surely just my bills are higher because when you use electricity during the day, they charge more than when you use electricity at night. So unless you get pump at night, it's not going to.
Yeah, well, usually when we turn it on, we just leave it on. It's 20,
Right, okay.
24.
So that's one of the reasons why you're going to pay more is because.
Yeah, I was kind of under the impression we were hardly using any groundwater right
Yeah.
now, so that's why it caught my attention.
There also is a pump that the Rancho Monte Alegre has set
That's
up on.
10,000, yeah.
Yeah, one of our meters that they reimburse us. It's to, you know, it was originally for the mitigations that we're required to do for the Department of Fish and Wildlife permit that we have for Santa Monica Creek. So there's a bunch of oak trees that were planted up on the hill that have to be watered. So that's been running a lot, I think.
Okay. Yeah, remember that. Okay. So I say aye. Sorry.
No, we're good. So a motion is second, and we need roll call, please.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Wingerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Then we got item number 4C, Director Quarterly Compensation Report.
I move to approve. I'll second.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Then roll call, please.
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Wingerdon?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
You want to do this? Move
Yeah.
item 7A.
I'd like to make a motion to consider item 7A ahead of item 6.
Yeah. Yep.
I'll second that.
We got a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Wingerdon?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
So you want to make your presentation?
Yeah, so staff received a request to co-locate, sorry, let me get to it here, to co-locate a antenna on our Shepherd Mesa tank. There are a number of existing antennas on that tank, and if you may recognize a photo of it. And I believe the fire district has some equipment already located on the ground below that, and a small antenna located on the rail of the tank here. We also have a antenna that is a directional. We have both a directional and what we call a Yagi, an omnidirectional antenna to communicate our SCADA for our SCADA system. It's Shepherd Mesa tank is the highest point in the district, and so it's a good place for us to get signals, for example, from Gouverneur Canyon, which is kind of lower and behind a mountain, not in direct sight with the headquarters where we have the interface to look at all of the data. So we have an antenna here, and as I said, the fire district already has an existing antenna here. So we received a proposal to add an additional antenna with some, I think, upgraded equipment below. And so the first step in this process will be, we asked the fire district, both Summerlin, Carpinteria, Summerlin, and Montecito, to give a little presentation on what they're proposing. This is a process, a long process in which, if we agree to participate in this with them, they'll have to get a permit from the county and certainly do some outreach in that area. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the chief here.
Good evening, Board. Thank you for allowing us to be here tonight. My name is David Niels. I'm the fire chief of the Montecito Fire Department. With me is Robert Kovac, who's the chief of Carpinteria Summerlin Fire, and also Travis Editor, a division chief with Montecito Fire, who works primarily for operations and also is responsible for our communications network that runs out of our South Coast Dispatch Center, which is at Montecito headquarters at Station 91 on San Ysidro. What we're here to speak to you today, and if you don't mind, Bob, the next slide, is about a necessity for some upgrade in regards to equipment for our VHF communication system. This is the radio network that works out of our South Coast Dispatch Center, and that allows us to speak with our engines in the field, all our personnel, be it out and about in the districts or within a fireground situation. So it's our emergency communications network. Currently, we work off of a repeater system from Gibraltar Peak, as well as the repeater that's on Shepherd Mesa. We have additional equipment that's known as voters. That ancillary equipment helps broadcast our signals throughout both districts. The current system isn't ideal because it depends a lot on old infrastructure, and that's one of the things right now. We don't have redundancy in our emergency communications network, and that's a huge concern for myself and Chief Kovac. So over the years, and we started speaking with Brian King from the Water District last year about this project, our proposal is to add a microwave dish, I suppose, to the west side of the water tank. And I think if we go to the next slide, it will be a little bit clearer of what we're describing. The picture on the left there is the antenna closest to us in the photo is what's part of our system currently in place. The proposal is the red outline there of placing a microwave dish that would point up to Gibraltar, the peak of Gibraltar, in our current communications infrastructure. What's important with the microwave, it's more of a point-to-point communications network. It allows the field of sight from one location to another to allow for communication. And it also allows the systems that if trees fall down onto power lines, which currently carry some of our Frontier copper cable lines in place, it allows for a system that is foolproof. And that's a huge concern and desire for both fire departments currently. With the upgrade of putting that microwave dish on the tank, we'd also be requesting the addition of a equipment box, which we've outlined in yellow and where we show the pad right next to the current equipment box. The secondary equipment box does not need power run underground or any utilities to be dug up from the current power pole or Southern California Edison equipment. It's just a connection from one box to the other. And there would be a similar equipment in regards to the line running off the top or the box in the picture back up to the tank to the microwave dish. So that is the basic request, placing the dish on the western side of the tank pointing towards Gibraltar and adding an equipment box as outlined in the photo there in the center of the page. Next slide, please. This is the ground view. One of the things that your water district staff stated was important, that their equipment could be accessed at all times. So similarly to where they requested the initial box be placed, the secondary box would allow access of 6 feet or more to the infrastructure that's there at the bottom part of the water tank. The power pole is in the right side of the picture, and that's existing equipment that was in place, I believe probably during construction period of when the tank was placed. We don't need to make any changes to any of that ancillary equipment, just strictly the addition, like I said, of the microwave dish and the addition of the small concrete pad to allow us to put a secondary box in place. The next slide describes a little bit of the permit process. We started this when we had discussions earlier in the year with both chiefs and Mr. McDonald and Mr. King from your organization. The permits were created at that time, and we've actually had them in place since May 8th of this year, prepared for signatures. So we still have those in place. It discusses the master application, the agreement to pay, which would all be borne upon by the fire departments, indemnification, the authorization of applicant, authorization of agent, as well as additional information needed for the overall county project, which we're prepared to provide. The next slide is an aerial just of the area. I understand, conversations have taken place about what is this going to do for our neighbors, and I'll get a little bit more into the microwave dish and how those are placed in other parts of the county. I know that it was important for us to look at what the county requires. Currently, they require notification to parcels 300 feet away from the APN that identifies where the water tank is. We measured out at least 6 addresses, and we've included those just so your board is aware that we can reach out to the 6 addresses listed there off of Shepherd Mesa. As you look, and we have some slides, I believe the next slide shows the viewpoint towards Gibraltar Peak. There are no homes in the line of sight for the microwave dish to Gibraltar. That's what makes it an ideal location in regards to our system infrastructure. But I did want to share some slides with some of the Santa Barbara City infrastructure. If you go to the next slide, I guess this is looking back towards the water tank. You can see that westernly edge below the water tank, and there are no residences in line of our microwave dish proposal up to Gibraltar. And then the next slide talks a little bit about other areas that have communications infrastructure in place. This is the VicTrace communications infrastructure, which runs communications for the City of Santa Barbara Police Department, Fire Department, Public Works, and other agencies within the city. It's hard to see in these photos, but there is a microwave dish in the bottom left-hand picture pointed over the residences, and then also up in the upper right-hand corner pointing towards the downtown city area. The next picture is actually not a city infrastructure, but that's actually a residence with the tower behind it and associated microwave and cell tower and communications equipment as well. So the proximity of microwave dishes, they're all over our communities. We have one on top of our fire station. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the reports that our engineer our engineer has completed from 5 Bar Engineering. Keith Turcott, who lives here in the community, is a very well-known radio systems engineer. He actually designed the radio towers you see on top of the new World Trade Center buildings. This information is something that Keith went through and looked at all his professional data from different, obviously the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, as well as the Council on Radiation Protection Measurements, because we wanted to make sure there's no harm to any of the residents nearby by us proposing to put a microwave dish on. For an example, if the radio microwave dish was pointed directly to the ground, the number there on the bottom of that chart shows 6.7%. That's a worst case scenario from being in the line of sight of the beam from a microwave dish. The FCC allows, as you can see, that upper end of 100%. For the general public. It's a very small percentage, but also that is if it was pointing directly to the ground. It is being pointed up to Gibraltar, so there is no direct impact to the residents nearby or directly for workers on the tower at any point in time. And that's important, and I wanted to just make sure that the board understands that we reviewed that as well to ensure that there wouldn't be impacts to anybody on the tower. The next slide talks about power consumption. I understand in the past agreement, and I have to say that was signed specifically just between the Carpinteria Summerlin Fire District and not the Montecito Fire Department. I feel it's important that since both agencies are using this equipment, that we've changed and provided the district a sample letter of agreement, which includes both fire departments as applicants for this process. But I do know one of the things that was mentioned in that agreement was talking about power consumption and some cost sharing for the use of power. It is my understanding that at this time the departments do not do any cost sharing, and I'm not certain why that was never completed as part of the agreement. But I do want to re-look at, as we did the power consumption data analysis, for the equipment that we have in play, it talks about if it was running at 12 hours per day, the cost would be about $20 per month. Our systems don't run 24 hours a day. There are times where the temperatures are warm and the fans inside those equipment boxes are running during the higher temperatures. So it is something that we are looking forward to making sure we pay a fair share for our use of any impacts while on the tower or having that equipment in play. The final slide just reiterates why this is such an important thing for our department and our communities. Communications are integral to the safety of our personnel and also to the service of our community. We've had a tremendous relationship with the Water District in regards to having our equipment on the tower, and we'd like to continue that partnership with your authorization for the future. It's super important to both fire chiefs and to all the commanding officers that we do everything we can to keep our folks safe and have a redundant system. And that's why we're here tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Go ahead, Polly.
Chief, several slides ago, maybe 5 or 6, there was a slide at the very bottom that said it was substantial in no substantial change in parentheses. And so I didn't know why. I didn't know what substantial meant in terms of measurement. I didn't know why it was in parentheses.
Yeah, so that was an addition from the county application process. There was a reference to, let me see if you don't mind, let me find that. Adding the microwave antenna would not trigger substantial change criteria and no S-bar would be required.
Right.
So that was in the county documentation that I just wanted to use their wording as they used.
Oh, I see.
In parentheses.
Okay. It was kind of vague. Okay, great. Thank you. I certainly understand the need for redundancy. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Pat, any questions?
No.
Shirley, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering how big is the dish?
The dishes range from size of 2 feet to 3 feet. So our initial estimates were 2 feet. As they did some engineering and stuff, it's possible it will be a bit bigger. The initial permit application is for that size.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Casey?
I had a question that Bob might be able to answer. Do you know if, or either one of you, if 5-Bar did any kind of analysis on any potential interference to our existing SCADA equipment or our communication systems?
Yeah, I appreciate that because initially when 5-Bar did the study, and Keith's very familiar with the SCADA equipment that you do have, I do understand that when the initial application of the antennas that were put back in 2013, there was some interference that occurred. All of Keith's research and his understanding of the frequencies is that that would not be an issue with the microwave component.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bob, are you and Brian satisfied with the documentation?
I mean, we're pretty early on. We haven't analyzed this. Right now, the first step is really to get your comfort level on proceeding with this proposal. If you're comfortable with it, we'll proceed and start analyzing all of the information and come up with a staff report. At some point, I think that what the fire districts are wanting is us to agree to sign the CDP application as the landowner, which is a requirement to have a complete application and for them to move forward.
Okay.
So I think that's where we're at.
Okay, do you need a motion, or are we just?
No, this is just for information. Again, we'll come back with a staff report at the next meeting and go through some areas that we've analyzed and have some items for discussion.
Okay, but I take it the board is supportive to move forward? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like me to leave the permits with you?
Does Brian have that? Excuse me. Does Brian have a copy of that? Or?
We delivered them in May, so.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll
I
keep-
re-signed the dates to today.
Okay, thank you.
Then I'd like to adjourn the regular meeting of the Carpinteria Valley Water District and adjourn the meeting of the Carpinteria Groundwater Sustainability Agency and call the meeting to order. Number 2, public forum. Any person may address the board of directors on any matter within his jurisdiction which is not on the agenda. Nothing. Then we got approval items. 3A, minutes of the meeting of the board held on September 13, 2023.
Polly motions for approval.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Do we need a roll call, please?
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Weerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Then we got item number 3B, disbursement report for August 16, 2023, September 15, 2023.
Polly motions for approval.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? The roll call, please.
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Weerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Then we got item number 4, unfinished business, none. Item number 5, new business, 5A, consider availability of the GSP for public comment. Bob.
Yes, so a little bit of applause in the background, yay. This work of developing the GSP that we've been wrapped up in for the last 2 years has come to a somewhat of a conclusion. All of the document has been drafted. We worked with the technical team over the last 2 years to make sure that the document both reflects local input as well as the requirements of Sigma for the groundwater sustainability plan. One of the last steps in the process is having a comment period, and there's not really any guidance on how long that comment period should be, but we decided to go with a 30-day comment period. The parts of the document have been available for longer, but the entire document is now available. So primary way to access that document is through the GSA website, which is at www.carpgsa.org. You can just type in in Google Carpinteria GSA and it'll come up. So this is a screenshot of the landing page of the GSA web page, and you can see these buttons kind of running along the middle here. And one of the buttons that we just added is called Carpinteria Sustainability Plan. So you would click on that, and it takes you to the page where all the information for the document is. When you click on that, I know you can't really see that. This is what shows up, and these are the chapters. So you can download the chapters individually if you're interested in a particular thing to look at. It's a little bit smaller and easier to handle. All files are in PDF. But if you want to really download the whole thing, there's a location. You can click on a link here, and it will download the entire document. So comment submission is also primarily or preferably done through the website. There's a comment form that appears on that page, at the bottom of that page that we were just on the website, and it you have to put in a few bits of information, but then you can put comments in. You can make either general comments about the whole document or specific to text in each or any particular section. Those comments, when submitted, will go to a database, and then our technical consultant will gather all of those and address those in the final comment. There will be a second period of comment once we submit it to DWR. DWR goes through a similar process where they have a comment period, and so if someone is unable to make a comment by the close of the comment period for us, they'll have a second shot with DWR. So comments can be submitted until November 6th at the close of business. They can be submitted through the website, as I said, through the comment forms. That's preferred because it gives us a much better, much easier way to handle comments. If we get a bunch of paper comments, that makes it a little bit more work. But alternatively, comments can be submitted by letter. They just need to send the letter to the executive director of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, who is me at 1301 San Ynez Avenue, Carpinteria, California. And then, for those who don't have access to computers, printed copies will be available at the district, at the city or the Carpinteria Library, and at the city hall. Those are being printed right now, and so they should be available by the end of this week. Those will be just on a review, there. Those won't be, you won't be able to take those with you. But we will be providing printed copies by request, but you have to pay for the printing costs for those. So that's it. Any questions?
Any questions?
I just wanted to say I reviewed my comments with Bob, and they were very helpful, so thank you.
Thank you. So then we move on to item number 5B, consider schedule for the GSP adoption.
Yeah, so this is just kind of a continuation of that last item, but kind of looking back and looking forward here on this timeline, I find this timeline is pretty helpful. You can see we started in 2021, and we've been working on various things, including updates to the hydrogeologic groundwater model, which was a foundational tool for us to ask and answer questions about various proposed projects and management actions and sustainable criteria. And then we worked also on, a new well, new monitoring well, which is right here, which is the next item, to help us understand some more about the basin. We did some geophysical work out at the slough a while back. And then we created a system that tracks, a database system that tracks all of the data with the monitoring wells that we've been using to collect data for many years. Held a lot of public workshops, as you know, and a lot of advisory committee workshops. And so we're coming to the end of that, and you can see here we're kind of in 2023. The next step is this comment period that we just talked about. Then we'd like to update and finalize the GSP and bring it to the board on November 29th for consideration of adoption. And then if that does get adopted, then we plan to submit it to DWR by December 20th, 2023, which the deadline for us to submit is December 31st. Once that's been received, it can take up to 2 years for DWR to review and either approve or not approve. And we don't expect that because that was really the schedule when they were getting a lot of GSPs. We're sort of at the end of, the majority of the submitted GSPs, so it should be a little faster than that. We also have a grant that we received from DWR of $1.9 million, so we'll be closing that grant out at the end of January. And then we have to turn around pretty quickly. In April, we have our first annual report for Sigma, and that's described in the GSP, but basically we have to summarize a bunch of information and data about how the implementation is going. And then from there, we do that every year. Every 5 years, we update the GSP. 20 years, we have to be in compliance with all of the sustainable management criteria that we set. And so as part of the adoption of the GSP, what we'll do is the next two GSA meetings will have a presentation about kind of some of the details of what went into the GSP, just so you have a better idea as you're reading through it. All right?
Okay, go ahead, Polly.
I'm sorry, Bob, I had a question on the other one, but it kind of pertains to this. Have we gotten any comments?
A few.
Okay.
Yeah,
Are they
handful.
constructive?
Some of them are, some of them,
Okay. Okay.
not so constructive. But
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Bob, thank you. And then move on to item number 5C, consider El Caro monitoring well project status.
Yeah, so this was, again, a project under that grant, and we had been planning it for a couple of years, and we finally broke ground on the 24th of July. Again, this is the project that's located in El Caro Park. It's a clustered monitoring well, which means there's 3 individual wells perforated at different depths to coincide with the A, B, and C zones. So this was not a 24-hour per day drilling operation. It was a 10 to 12-hour day. So some of the days when they were really deep and it takes a long time to actually get the drill string into the hole, they were doing 12-hour days from 7 to 7. They wrapped up the shallow well, so all 3 wells are done. Started with a deep well and then went to the intermediate well, and then the last well to be drilled was the shallow well, which was about 300 feet deep. Deepest was about 1,200 feet deep. They wrapped up the shallow well on September 21st. And the next step after that was to do a video of the wells to make sure everything looked good in downhole. So you send a video down the well hole, and it has a view looking down and views looking around, like sideways. So you can kind of see a close-up of what the wall looks like, and you can see kind of looking ahead as you're going down. One of the things that was discovered on the deep well was about 180 feet down. There appeared to be where the casing connects, there's a threaded coupling, and it appeared to be separated, and some of the pipe had a longitudinal crack. And then at the bottom of that same well, there was about a 10-foot piece of 1.5-inch PVC, which the contractor was using as a airlift line, and apparently as they were coming up, what we guess happened was the coupling on that pipe hit the coupling on the other, or something on the other, the casing, and broke off and damaged both both one fell to the bottom and inside the casing. So they're now looking at how to get the 1.5-inch PVC out of the bottom, which is they call it a fishing operation, which is, we've had this happen. Unfortunately, I've been here for long enough. I've seen it probably 4 times happen, where something gets stuck at the bottom of the well, and you have to fish it out. It's typically not a really difficult operation. It does take time. You have to go down and try to snag it, and once you get a hold of it, pull it up. But the more concerning part is the damage on the casing, and so they're going to make a proposal on how to patch that and make sure it doesn't have any effect on the well. The main concern is that it not allow communication between 2 wells, because the purpose of having separate wells was to have it only perforated in that zone, and we don't want to see any influences from the other well. So we're going to do a little bit of work on that and make sure it's good. So have a few photos. So this is the sound wall going up. This was the beginning. It came down here and went around. You kind of see the poles in the background there. There's no panels in there. And then they did have a return kind of coming out this way. Once the sound wall was all the way up, they mobilized the drill rig. So this is the drill rig and other mud and shaker equipment to make sure that, as they're circulating this mud into the hole and back out, that it's a certain consistency so that it keeps the hole from collapsing while they're drilling it. So this was I believe this was the first hole so this is the deep one. And so you can kind of see all of the equipment surrounding this area. It doesn't take up a lot of room, but, they do have to have a backhoe kind of moving material around, emptying some of this material out into dump trucks to be hauled away. And then this is them doing the shallow hole. So they were here, I think was the first hole. The second hole's there, and now they're on the third hole. They're in this picture. So this is what it looks like today. No more, the sound wall's been removed. There's still construction fencing out there to keep people on the field out of that area. The work to be done, the work remaining is to restore the field in this area, as well as complete the wells. There's 3 wells. I have another picture that shows them a little better, but there's 3 wells that are sticking above the ground. Those will be trimmed off, and we'll put the final flush plate down so that they aren't sticking above the ground. Again, this trail will need to be, some work will need to be done to restore the trail as well as the grass in the area. Yeah, here's a picture. You can kind of see where those are. You can see that little pipe sticking up. So again, those will be trimmed off flush with the ground, and a cap will be put on. So we went a little over what we expected. It was about an 8-week project, and I believe we went over a few weeks, and we're still not done, but most of the equipment is out, and we've been working with the city to make sure that they understand that the rest of the work is not going to be similar in nature, not noise producing. So that's where we're at.
Polly?
Who's paying for the fix on that dropped?
They will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matt?
Just the timing, I know that soccer field's in demand.
Yeah, they in one of the photos, I didn't really capture it very well, but you can see there's a cone there. So they actually have created a number of shorter fields out here. They are utilizing it, but yeah, we're very aware.
So do you think the delay will be months or weeks or?
We have a meeting on Friday to discuss the schedule, so I can't say now, but I'm guessing at least a month. Yeah.
Casey, Shirley? Okay, Bob, how deep is the intermediate well? I mean, one is 300.
800 feet.
800.
Yeah.
And just curious, is the well shaft plastic or stainless steel?
Yeah, they're 4-inch PVC pipes.
Okay, thank you. Then we got number 6, Executive Director Report, none. Number 7, this meeting is adjourned, and we move back to the regular Carpinteria Valley Water District meeting. So we got item number 7B, consider allocation method update from Bob and Mesa.
Yeah, so this is not new. We've been working on this for a while, but we're at the point where we're ready to adopt the methodology that we've developed over the last year to come up with these allocations for each parcel. So we wanted to give a presentation today to kind of go over that and have you ask any questions before we have a public hearing next on the 25th, I believe, the next board meeting, to adopt the methodology. What the adopting the methodology will do is it'll create the authority for us to start, publishing those values for each parcel. So with that, I'll give it over to Misa.
Go ahead.
Okay, so as Bob said, we are moving towards adopting the initial allocation. So that's the methodology and then an allocation for each account within the district at the end of this month. And so this presentation just sort of wraps up some loose ends, reaffirms the applications of this project, and then also sort of introduces a new term to bridge the allocation program that we've been working on for the last year, and then the next step, which is the intensification policy. So I'm going to review the program applications, talk about what the results mean for available supply and development requests, which is one of those program applications, and then introduce a new term, demand credit, and talk about how it relates and where we go from here. You can go to the next slide, and then just, yeah. So I have 3 different categories here that I'm going to talk about. And again, these are not new. These are the same goals, applications, whatever term you want to use that we've been talking about for a year, and that also are in your staff report as well. So on the left, the first one we'll talk about is state compliance. So this is, the state is going to say, what is your total residential and landscape metered use? And if it exceeds the state's expectation, that is going to be a problem. So what we need to know essentially is our metered use for those 2 groups of accounts, and the way we do that, what's the solution down at the bottom, is the allocation. So that tells us total expected metered use for these accounts, and it's not necessarily just tied to, is it a drought year, is it a wet year? It gives you a better indication of what those accounts are likely to use based on the characteristics of the parcel, so less variation there than we would expect in year-to-year demand. So that is one application that we've been talking about. The next one, you can go to the next slide, is water available for development. We know that there is a lot of pressure for new housing right now, and we are definitely receiving development requests, and so we need to be able to respond to those and answer questions like, in an extended drought like we just had, will we have supply available for new demands, for new development, for example? And so what we need to know there is sort of that like maximum reasonable expectation of water use based on, the characteristics of the district, all the different accounts in the district, how much do we really expect them to use? And so again, that's the allocation provides that to us for the same reasons that I just mentioned. You can go to the next one. Another aspect of this that I want to mention, and this would be like in your staff memo, I mentioned like supply and demand planning and budgeting, and I think this is just one example in that category, is understanding the maximum potential demand. So right now we have some parcels that are undeveloped or some parcels that are partially developed, like maybe an agricultural field that has, it's only half planted. It's temporary fallow, something like that. So we want to understand if every parcel in the district actually fully utilized its parcel, so like fully utilized the water that it's entitled to, what would the total demand then be? So this is a little bit different than the allocation. It's a slightly different thing that we're trying to understand, because we also want to understand well use with this too. So like total basin impact of like maximum potential demand in the district. So if you go to the next slide, Bob, this is where that new term demand credit comes in. And I want to introduce this now. I'll talk about it more later in the presentation, but there are instances which the allocation does not cover and the demand credit will cover. So it makes sure that every parcel in the district, every account in the district has some water use expectation from the district. So you can go to the next one. Are there any questions about these?
Anyone? Oh, go ahead.
Okay, keep going. So available supply, we have some bar graphs here. So this first one we're going to look at is in drought conditions. So what you have on the left there is the total allocation that we've been looking at, but in drought. So we're assuming actually only 90% of the allocation, because we're assuming there would be some reduction in use likely in drought conditions. So it's 90% of the total allocation, and then those lines there, the solid red one is our expectation of our supply in drought conditions, in an extended drought right now, and then the dashed red line would be if we also have CAP online. So you can see if we look at our current supply in drought, that bar is above that solid red line, which means we're actually over allocated. And then that little blue bar on top of there is the additional request that we see for proposed development. So that's a little bit concerning if we're looking at this in drought conditions. If you go to the next slide, Bob. So we can also look at this here as the available supply with CAP. So if we look a couple years in the future, maybe, we say, okay, CAP online, we're not over allocated anymore. We now have some supply available, but we also want to think about how much of that is already allocated to the developments that are proposed. So that light blue bar is what's already allocated to development, and then the light green is what would be available with CAP. And so if you go to one more slide, Bob. So that green bar just got smaller from the previous slide. It went from 280 down to 220, and that's just one development. It's one really, really big development, but I think it's important to consider the impact that one development could have on that available supply bucket there. So that's sort of what we're working with in thinking about over the next couple of years with CAP coming online, what supply is available in drought conditions. Are there any questions about that before I move on to the normal conditions view, which I will
Casey?
show?
So is that like 100% uptime for CAP? What's that figure based on?
I think that's the average that we expect, right?
In the design, we are expecting 1,000 acre feet per year, so that's the number we use to add. So if you look at that lower solid red line, it's somewhere around 3,800, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 38. So the dash red line is 4,800. It's just 1,000 acre feet more.
And is it pretty much always 1,000 acre feet? Do you think there'll be much fluctuation above or beyond that?
The way we're planning it and designing it, it's going to be consistently 1,000
Okay,
acre feet
so
per
yeah,
year.
pretty much always 1,000. Yeah.
Shirley?
Yeah, I think this is something new, I think, that we're seeing. We haven't looked at proposed development before, and this is a good start to see how it changes, especially if our housing pressure is, goes up or down in the future. And also, one thing I pointed out at the meeting is that the proposed development definition is kind of open right now, and it's not just based on what do you call it, applications to serve or requests to serve, which is what a builder would start off with, and a lot of those don't go through, and we. Under Bob's leadership, he created a change in protocol for those, that you had to, like, make it a little more formal, fill out a form, give us more information. Before it was just, it was just a request and it went through. So that's kind of cut the amount of those that are generated now, and they're more serious if they are generated. But this, some of this proposed development doesn't have any paperwork yet, or not even a request to serve. So that's due to note. Maybe we'll fine tune that later in the future. But I really think that's a good thing to be able to look at. And Mezzo presented at the committee some other. Well, actually, maybe it's this bar chart, but some of the bar charts I never really understood, because people ask you, well, if we're in a drought, how can you have more building? And if we have to cut back or we'll run out of water, how can we make more building? But it's the drought situation, and according to state law and our reports to the state, if you look at the one chart, if we're normal year, we have enough water for new developments. But in a drought, we don't. So now we have the cap entering the equation, and also new development. So I think this is really, we're coming along here. We're, as a non-expert, myself, I think it's kind of a visual of how we're coming along with better planning. So that was my point.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment, if through the chair. So these charts, or these bar charts, are reflecting drought conditions. So that's one way to look at your water supply and ask the question, do we have enough water? You could be asking the question, do we have enough water in droughts? Or you could also ask the same question in normal conditions. And the picture is different in normal conditions, because typically your water supply goes up during normal conditions versus drought conditions, right? Because during drought, you start losing your surface water supplies, or they become less reliable. Groundwater starts to get stressed. So all of those affect available supply. Did you have a normal?
Yeah, if you want to go
okay.
to the next slide.
Before
it
you do, I have
shows-
a question. Just
Yeah.
the 228 is available supply with cap. How's that number?
So that's the difference between the allocation at 90% in drought conditions and then the total supply that we expect to have available in drought conditions. So we look at historically in drought conditions, what do we have available from like state water supply? How much groundwater do we pump? How much do we get from Kachuma? And it's the difference between those two.
Yeah, so this number, 4285, is 90% of the allocated water. This blue is known proposed developments, which I don't know how much that is. Looks like about maybe 80 acre feet or something like that.
Yeah, 60, I think.
Yeah, and
maybe.
then you add those together, you subtract it from 4,800, and you get 228.
So that's showing the available extra water, the
The
228?
green, yeah, is
Unallocated.
unallocated water after cap.
Yep.
If you look at before cap, you obviously see we're over. For droughts, we are over allocated, which makes sense because
That helps a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like, where's that number coming from? Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense because we've had to purchase other supplemental water during drought, which means, yes, we didn't have enough water to make it through the drought. And that's shown here, where average consumption is used as another way to look at that.
Any more questions?
So if you go to the next slide, Bob. So this is the same setup, except we're looking at normal conditions, which is why the bars look much lower, because the y-axis is much higher. Relatively higher. So the allocation bar in the left would be full allocation rather than the 90% we were showing before. And then that yellow line is our current available supply in normal conditions. And then the yellow dashed line would be our available supply with cap, so that extra 1,000 acre feet. But you can see that in normal conditions, the gray bar doesn't reach all the way to the yellow line, and the difference there is the available water supply. So that 761 plus the light blue is the difference between the gray bar and the yellow line, and that's available supply. The light blue shows what is already allocated to proposed development, and as Shirley pointed out, that is a very loose term. These are just, developments that we've had some information about, but it doesn't mean that there's already, they're definitely going to be built or there's already water promised to them or anything.
Right, sure.
Question. Wait a minute, it was in my head and now I know. Oh, yes. One thing I wanted to make sure I understand is the allocation for the residential and all of the detail, aerial shots on each parcel of land and outdoor use, indoor use, hardscape, all that. That is actually higher than expected or historical use above, by and large, isn't it?
So if you look, it's a little bit hard to see it in this one. Will you go back to the previous slide, Bob? Yeah, so on these bars, you can see the allocation on the left at 90% is almost equal to 2021 consumption on the right. So it is, in 2021, the allocation would be almost equal to what we actually saw in consumption. The average consumption bar in the middle is a little bit lower. So the allocation is higher than our average consumption from like the last 6 years, I want to say, but it is still a very applicable number because it does represent recent use that we've observed.
My second question on that, which I'm still a little confused on, is the unknown. This is just residential and industrial and use. What about the other half of the use, the private pumping and agriculture? How is that on this?
So this is all metered use. So it's residential based on that aerial imagery. It's commercial, industrial, public authority based on their historical water use, and agricultural based on their historical water use. So it does represent all of our users, but only their metered use. So this doesn't capture the well part, and that's why we're bringing the demand credit terminology in.
Okay, and then there's a third dimension. Okay, I get that. That's for our purpose. The state, what they're going to allow us or fine us or anything, they're not even counting agriculture, are they?
No, just the residential and landscape.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that's going to work. If we're using more water than we should, and how are they going to, I guess they're just going to ask us what our meter is, and then we'll be, responsible for that, but not, only our meter and our billing. We're going to say we've sent out this much water, and but only this much was residential accounts, and the rest is from agricultural accounts. And if that runs way over, they're not going to fine us at this point in time. And do you have any idea how that's going to work? Because it's not going to be the total that we're meter, right?
Yeah, we're already actually required to report residential use, as well as, I believe, CII to the state.
We report pretty much every customer
I
category
know,
to the
but
state.
so they're not going to. Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah,
so then they're not going to hammer us for the other, but just for our reported residential.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
we have a
far.
lot of reports that are like by individual customer class. So like how much was your residential metered use in the last month? How much was your commercial metered use? So they will look at just the residential bucket and just the landscape bucket and ignore the other ones.
And we didn't used to have residential landscape. We just had residential. So that's a new thing. Okay. Yeah. All right. I understand that a little better because I've looked at those reports and they are, very interesting. But I somehow I had in my head that it's just going to be total water use that we're really at risk here, and so far it's just the residential, internal, external. Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mesa.
So you can keep going. Okay, I think, yeah. And so this is the same slide we just looked at, normal conditions, except you have that extra 1,000 acre feet for CAP there. So in normal conditions, especially with CAP online, we're showing that we do have available supply. We have quite a bit relative to the amount of proposed development that we're seeing, but it's really important to keep in mind the drought conditions as well.
I think that's an interesting point. Asterisk could be, just for presentation purposes, represents groundwater recharge at that point.
Yeah.
You mean the cap production? Well, no, so cap is, will be a base flow, so we'll always recover that water.
Except in years we don't demand it, so we have a,
Well, so we always will have at least 1,000 acre feet of demand, so we'll always capture that water.
oh, so you're not planning to have any cap replenishment at all, it's just going to be
Yeah,
natural
it's designed, in fact, we can't because of the way that the aquifer response is when you inject water. It eventually mounds up to the point where the pressure gets too high for you to inject anymore. So we have to we have to do a put and take. We have to be taking it out at the same rate we're putting it in order for it to be continuous. And so where I think you might get some recharge is we may not take as much naturally percolating groundwater as we have in historically.
Well, so it's almost just like it's a molecule of water, one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a molecule of water, although in our modeling, we set a target to make sure that we get, we try to maintain a certain amount of,
Less than 1,000.
what's that?
We would withdraw no less than 1,000 per year.
No less 1,000 for cap water, but then naturally percolating water, we would also, I believe our target was 1,000 acre feet in the modeling, yeah. So an additional percolating, so we would get 2,000 acre feet of groundwater each year. So that makes up half of our water supply. And so what would probably happen is we would take probably no state water and less Kachuma water.
Got it, okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, next slide. So we're going to talk about this new term demand credit and how it fits into all of this. And this is really a bridge between what we've been doing and where we go from here. So go to the next slide. So just to review terminology here. So the allocations represent metered use for the district. So they're not capturing the well pumping. So we need to bring in this demand credit because we're going to publicize allocations and tell every account that they have an allocation, right? Except there's some accounts where we have like a meter on a parcel, but there's no development on that parcel. It's just like a vacant parcel. And so their allocation wouldn't really represent the use that you would expect on that parcel once it was actually developed. And then there's other parcels that are undeveloped that don't even have a meter. And there's some parcels where, as I mentioned, it could be like a partially planted avocado field, so it's not totally planted out, and then also maybe they have a well. So the allocations capture a very important picture of use for our planning and the needs that I discussed earlier, but it's not every use case, and it's not really every account in the way that makes the most sense. So, and definitely not every parcel in the district if it's undeveloped with no account. So we want to have this other term demand credit so that we can capture that other use. And that'll be really important as we move forward with the intensification policy. So saying if there's an undeveloped parcel and its land use has changed, it's developed, and there's some intensification there, how do we actually calculate that? Like what's its starting value? And then how do we calculate the change? And so this demand credit will enable us to do that. So if you go to the next slide, we have a couple of pictures to look at. So these are three different examples of what we could see in the district for what I'm calling developed parcels. You can't really read the yellow at the top there, but it says developed parcel. So for a residence, their allocation is what we've been talking about all along. It's the number of dwelling units and the irrigated area. And then their demand credit would be the same thing because we already have something that represents the characteristics of the parcel, but is also, it's not as abstract as looking at a bunch of different parcels and their average, but it's also not just what have they used historically. It's what does the parcel need? And then commercial, industrial, institutional customers, so their allocation is currently based on their historical use. So what we want for the demand credit there is something that will actually be more representative of the parcel and trends that we see in similar parcels. So what we'll say is, what is the zoning of the parcel? If it has a meter, what is its meter size? What is its customer class? We'll look at those different factors and come up with an average water use among them, and then say that's the demand credit for the parcel. So even if there was a building, that was vacant for a little while, so its historical use was 0, it'll still have a demand credit that represents what is a reasonable use for that parcel based on its characteristics. So similarly with agricultural accounts, because their allocation is based on historical use, we want something that represents what the real water demand of that parcel is. And so if someone had, been using, very little agricultural on their parcel, like is shown on the right, their historical use and their allocation would be very low, but we don't want to penalize them if they were to fully plant out that parcel, right? Because that's what it's zoned for. That makes sense for that parcel. So the demand credit will say, this is their water use if they fully utilize their parcel, if they completely plant it out, so that they won't be penalized then if they do that. And if you go to the next slide, I have one other agricultural example here. So same thing, developed parcels, but here for the agricultural account, just for their allocation, we still use their historical use. For the demand credit, rather than using the average of similar parcels, we can just use their crop factor in acres because it's already fully planted. So then it just gives us something more specific to that parcel. The average of similar parcels we can use when it's not fully planted, so we don't have that information.
I have a question. So why are we using different methods for like the 3 classes? Why does a undeveloped agricultural parcel get demand credit when like you could easily change a residence, if I tear out hardscape and put in a lawn or something like that? Why the difference in methodologies between the classes?
And which 2 is it that you're?
I mean, all of them really, they're all different, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Why are we not using historical use for the allocation on residential?
So the allocation on residential, the state is saying what the methodology should be there, and we're using that. And we would like to have a similar, equation, landscape, or parcel characteristic based method for the other account classes. We just don't have that. It hasn't been developed. So we have to use historical use because we don't have something better. But the problem is, if you use historical use for the allocation, we don't necessarily want that to be the demand credit, because that could then penalize someone if they were to use more of their parcel, which they should already be allowed to do. So there's a difference because it's different use cases, and so we're sort of responding to each use case. Like the ones where there's historical use, we're trying to come up with something that is different than that historical use that better represents full water demand of the parcel, whereas that's sort of already captured by the residential allocation methodology.
Then a question on Casey's question then. So eventually the state's going to tell us how much each residential parcel should be their fair share or their fair use. But if you take a home with a lawn and a home that put in the hardscape, who's going to decide who gets to do what?
Yeah, it is point in time based. Someone can always appeal their allocation if they make a change to their parcel. Like if they, wanted to, well, I guess usually you go the other way. Usually you're reducing the amount of irrigated area there. But if you did want to put in a big lawn or something, you could appeal your allocation.
But under the state rules, most likely, everybody's going to be told you can only use X amount of water per residential parcel.
So yeah, the state isn't holding us to individual allocations, but it is holding us to the sum of those. So, if one residence made a change, it wouldn't necessarily impact our state compliance, but we do have to think about how the aggregate of those changes would affect our state compliance.
Right, but eventually, we're going to have to treat all our customers fairly, because the state is telling us, hey, this is really what the cumulative use can be. That's the direction we're going, right? It is. as far as eventually, we will have an allocation per residential parcel, and I think eventually even an ag parcel is going to have its allocation too, but is that the direction we're taking?
Yeah, this methodology is that. We're going to allocate a certain amount to every parcel, and so we're there. And, you know, I think Mesa talked about the use cases. There are multiple use cases for this allocation. You know, we can be using it to make sure that we're going to be able to comply with the state's regulations for the sum of the allocated use to be more than the actual use, right, for residential in particular. That's one use case. There's another use case is targeting certain overusers with conservation messaging or any other methodology in which we can encourage them to reduce their use.
Would fines be one of those methodologies?
It's up to you. We haven't crossed those bridges yet. You know, it's going to depend on how we the situation and how we decide as a board, or how you decide as a board you want to handle those parcels that are using more water than they're allocated.
Right, but the direction we're taking is we want to protect the responsible users, and we want to, encourage the excessive users to start behaving themselves, right?
Right, and so that's a use case. How we do that has not been answered. That's a question for you all to ponder, and certainly we can give you ideas. But ultimately, I think when the time comes to make that decision, that's something that the board would have to consider.
Right, and I think during our committee, Shirley and me were there. I think you mentioned there's really not that many parcels that are really going over their potential reasonable use, right?
Most are under.
Right, okay. Yeah, okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, and I just maybe to follow up on Director Balch's question, because we have multiple use cases, one approach, the allocation approach, for example, works for those cases versus demand credits work for other use cases. And so that's why we ended up having two different ways to look at, parcels. In particular, when you're talking about historic use, which is not always representative of what the potential water use is on a parcel.
Can I follow up with one question? So how do you do you just base this agricultural parcel on the right looks like an underdeveloped avocado orchard? Do you just assume that if they were to expand it, is the demand credit based on avocados? Or
So it would be based on similarly zoned parcels. So that one is, I believe, county agricultural zoning. And then if it has a meter, so like say a 2-inch meter, and agricultural class. So it's not necessarily avocado specific. We've talked about whether we should use a sort of middle ground determining factor that's representative of not the highest water users and not the lowest water users in terms of crops, but somewhere in the middle or an average. We haven't determined that yet, but I think that what we're trying to represent is likely use on that parcel. So I think we could take a safe middle ground there for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I guess just one other thing on this is you have to remember we have meters and then we have wells, which don't have meters, so we have to kind of find roundabout ways to get at their use that we estimate. And then we have these parcels, which are, partially developed, fully developed, undeveloped, may have a meter, may not. And so we have all these different use cases we have to think about and then figure out how to come up with numbers for them. And then also think about those applications we talked about at the beginning, right? So why are we coming up with this number? Is it for state compliance? Is it for our demand planning? Is it for understanding available supply? And that's why we have all of these different terms and all these different methodologies and formulas, is because it's the only way to actually answer those questions for every different combination that we have. It just gets kind of complicated. Okay, so this would be examples of parcels where we have a meter, but clearly they're undeveloped. So there aren't a lot of these, but these are often candidates for development, so it's really important to think about them. And again, this is a different use case than those developed parcels that we looked at. So we have to think about what methodology do we apply to them, what makes sense. And so for the allocation, their allocation is based on historical use if there's a meter there, but if there's no use on that meter, their allocation would be 0. So, we need, again, to represent if that parcel was developed, so say there's a residence there on the left, a residential parcel. If a residence was built on that, we don't want to penalize that residence for just using what the parcel is intended for. So the demand credit says, okay, this is a reasonable use for a residential parcel. If you develop within that, then you're fine, right? And so the middle one is a commercial example, and then the right one is an agricultural example. And you can see there's a well there too. I think it's the red well that's active and the black one that's not active. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, it's important to consider whether there's a well there, because again, the allocation would only be assigning a metered use expectation to the parcel, and depending on who the user of that parcel is, they might be getting some of their water from the well and some from the meter. So the demand credit is the whole picture, saying the total water use expected. You get it from either source, that's fine, but this is the total expected for the parcel.
That middle one has an application in for something like 160 homes or something.
It does, yes.
So that's not
we
even
have to
commercial,
think about
industrial,
these.
or institutional, so you have to consider a zone change.
Exactly, and that's why we need to set this up so then we can talk about the intensification part of it. So you can go to the next slide. This is just same thing, but there's no meter on these parcels. So they have no allocation, but we do want to have a representation of their expected water use if they were developed. And that's the demand credit. I believe that is all of the examples. Before I go to the next step, any questions? I know it's confusing to think about because we have a lot of different combinations to consider.
Anyone? No? Go ahead.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, so assuming at the end of this month we adopt the initial allocation methods and allocations for each account, the question is then what next? And what we need to consider is our intensification policy. So we talked about the demand credit term today because that's really foundational to the intensification policy. Then next, we'll need to actually come up with the methods for calculating intensification, and then what is the result? So we have initial allocations and demand credits. How do we calculate intensification? And then what's the difference between that initial demand credit and the resulting demand credit and allocation? And we will likely need to do a study as well for the intensification fee amount. And so this is most applicable to proposed developments, but it's helpful exercise to go through as well.
Will that study be in-house, Mason?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and just a clarification, so intensification is sort of self-explanatory, or intensifying the use of a piece of property that we were anticipating would continue in that use under our allocation study. And so that intensification means more water will be applied to that, and therefore we need to go out and, if we are exceeded from our existing water supply, which we are, we need to go out and purchase additional water, which would, in this case, be the CAP water, CAP project. But so that's kind of the nexus between the fee and what the intensification is doing.
That is it. I know that was confusing. If you want me to explain it again with other examples, I can always do that.
Any questions? Thank you, Asa.
Thanks.
Well done.
Then we move on to item number 7C, consider engaging Montgomery and Associates in an amount not to exceed $162,000 for CAP hydrological modeling services. Bob?
Yeah, first I need to apologize. I inadvertently forgot to put the proposal in the board packet, so it should be on your desk up there. It's been printed out for you. Talks about the scope of the work and the budget. So just kind of some background. Montgomery and Associates has been working with the district primarily through Pueblo Water Resources. They worked on the groundwater model update in 2012, which we did with a grant from DWR. And then they more recently worked with Pueblo to update the model to comply with requirements of SGMA. And so we have a model that's been updated both in terms of its ability, but as well as the number of years it considers. The previous 2012 model went from 1985 to 2008. In the SGMA effort, we updated it to 2020. So it's now 1985 to 2020, which includes a pretty significant drought, as you know. And so that model also had some technical upgrades in terms of how it handles the ocean and seawater interaction with groundwater basin. But it wasn't updated completely to do what we needed to do for the CAP project permitting. And so the purpose of the proposed modeling work is to assist us with the permitting for the drinking water permit, which is handled through the state board. What they want to see is they want to know how long does it take from the point you inject the water into your injection wells to the point it gets to one of your municipal pumping wells. It has to be more than 4 months. They also want to check the locations of the monitoring wells to make sure those fall within the prescribed time that it takes the water to travel. Ones, I think the nearest one's 2 weeks to maybe 2 months, and then the furthest one is that 4 month period. So that's one thing. They also want to know what is the fate of the water. So ultimately, short term and long term, where does that water go? And with modeling, one of the things I've learned over the years is you change one little thing and it completely changes the output. So you have to come up with some scenarios that are likely to happen while you're operating it, and so that's another thing. So the scope that Montgomery was asked to provide was to adapt the model that we just completed through SGMA so that it can accurately model what we call particle tracing, where the water gets injected, and trace that out to where it goes and how long it takes to get there. And then ultimately, both short term and long term. Long term is more important. Like, if you run it for 20 years, where's that water going to reach? What's the project area that water is going to reach? And that is important for the regional board because they want to understand what the impact of the project is on the groundwater basin in terms of how far it might be reaching and where monitoring may be prescribed through the permits. And then, as I said, consider various operational scenarios. We talked about, we're always going to take 1,000 acre-feet of water out of the wells, but we don't know really, are we going to take most of that out of El Caro or 50-50 out of El Caro and headquarters, or are we going to take, 25-75? And there may be reasons that we want to understand that with respect to the seawater. Obviously, the headquarters is closer to the coast, so we may want to shift the burden inland a little bit. We also have some sustainable management criteria in the GSP that may be impacted by pumping El Caro too much. So there's a lot of different things that have to be looked at and scenarios that need to be analyzed. I just put this old slide in here. This is a example of some of the preliminary particle tracking work that Montgomery did. And you can see these are these are kind of the old locations of the injection wells. One is kind of shown at the back of the St. Joe's field, but actually now it's further closer to Linden. And then this one was shown in Franklin Park, but this is now over here in the street, or proposed in the street. But nonetheless, you can see these color codes are time frames. So I believe it says 80 days is the red, and yellow is 180 days, and then a year out is kind of at the tip here. So you can kind of see what it looks like when we run a model and we assume we're taking a certain amount out of El Cairo well and a certain amount out of Headquarters well. In this case, I think the time period matters too, because at this during this modeling exercise, was 2016 or 2017, I believe. We had a big trough in here, and a lot, the trough was deepening as you go towards Headquarters wells. So what it did is it made these particle traces go towards Headquarters well. So that's an example of one of the outputs. Again, this is a supporting service that will be needed as we're working with the regulators at state board and regional board to get permits for the CAP project. So I know one of the things that Director Johnson has requested in the past, and so we're learning to show kind of where we are on the budget for CAP. And so put together this table of contracts that were let, including the one that's being considered tonight, as well as the previous expenditures on preliminary design. So all in contracted, including what we've already spent on the preliminary design, is about $7.3 million. So
This is 5.3.
5.3 for currently, the contracts that are currently let, but not, the money hasn't been expended fully. We're into both of the Woodard and Grand design process as well as the WSC management. So that's 5.3. But previous to this, between 2017 and 2022, we spent $2 million. So add that to the 5.
Bob, is this in the budget? Is it budgeted?
Yeah, this was part of the, part of the original budget at 100,000. So it's 160,000 because there's some optional scenarios in here. So the way it's proposed is we won't give authorization for that 600 unless the regulators make us go back and do some other scenarios.
And then where will we get the 60?
It's all coming from the same. It's coming from either the grant money or the loan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you for showing that the particle modeling water flow study from 2016-17, because I heard about this and I went, yeah, I thought we did that, but that was when we were also considering the particular place, because we had choices of injection. But I have one question on that. So now we're fine tuning that or doing it again. But is this? I think the 16-17, as I recall, wasn't that a model, a computer model based on what we knew? And there's another way of doing it where you actually measure particles somehow.
Yeah, so there's a...
Which is this going to be?
Yeah, so this is my modeling exercise, the Montgomery and Associates. And the 16-17 modeling was done based on the 2012 model, it was more of a simplified model than the current model, which is all the way up to 2020. Current model had, because of Sigma, incorporated some additional sophistications, I guess, if you will. So, and there are certainly more to go. For example, the 2012 model, I think, had 500-foot grids, so 500-foot squares that it would look at. So those were shrunken down in this more recent model. One of the newer additions to the model that we did for the GSA, GSP was it used to be annual time steps, and now it's monthly time steps. So a lot of kind of refinements of that model help us to look at it a little bit closer and what the impacts might be. As far as the tracer study, so that remains to be seen. Tracer study is when you put something in one location and then you wait for it to arrive at another location.
Exactly,
Yeah. It remains to be seen whether the regulators will make us, what they'll make us do with respect to that. They probably will make us do some tracer studies just to verify that the model is, reasonably representative of what's happening.
Yeah, and you probably can't even hardly do that until you have your injection monitoring wells
Right.
in physically. And yeah, I have one other question, which I just want to make sure about this, is, because we just did our 3-year rate and budget study and worked on that a lot. And I want to make sure that this CAP project, even though it's potable water treatment, is being paid for equally by all the different customer classes.
Yeah, so if you recall, during our 3-year rates workshops and study, where we ended up on that was the charge comes in on the CIP, which is kind of equally distributed across every account.
Oh, okay. Well, it's really complicated.
Yeah, the CIP,
I just want to be assured of the basic premise. is
Yeah, the
that we're all
CIP charge is
paying
based on the 5-year historic use, so it kind of gives you a mix of
capital improvement.
Yeah.
But there's capital improvement projects that are not allocated to agriculture, like the Rancho Montelegre tank, the Foothill tank, or the cover to the Carpinteria tank. Those are all capital
Right.
improvements,
But
they're
we have an
not.
O&M charge that's basically
But I just want to make sure that all this CAP CIP is equally distributed through all the classes.
that was one of the criteria that we worked with as we're developing the financial or the rate study.
Yeah, for now, and then it's definitely a piece of the puzzle for new water coming online, I think, because we certainly wouldn't be as pressed to do this if we didn't have, future expansions, so that's part of it, too, so. Okay, thank you very much for the history, too, because
Sure.
I was wondering about that.
Any other questions?
So you want
Yes.
a motion?
Yeah, so there's the recommendation, if you'd like to.
All right, so I'll move that we engage Montgomery and Associates for hydrogeological modeling services in an amount not to exceed $162,000.
Holly seconds.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Then roll call, please.
Director Holcomb?
Yes.
Director Johnson?
I
Director Roberts?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Weerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Then we move on to item number 7D, consider CAP funding update. For information, Bob?
Yeah, seems like I've been spending a lot of time on many phone calls regarding the funding of this, and we are about 3 or 4 months into the final design, and we are starting to get bills that are large from Woodard and Coran and WSC, and so we've been observing those, and we've talked a little bit about the cash flow issues, and I think the board, I don't know when it was, but authorized us to utilize reserves as kind of a buffer. We've also been talking with the Sand District in the event that some of these funding streams don't materialize in time, that we could borrow money from CSD. That's part of the joint exercise of powers agreement that we are working on as well. But I thought it would be good to have just kind of an update of the funding sources that we're looking at. And so Prop 1 IRWM, Integrated Regional Water Management, this is a grant that we received maybe about a year, or we were awarded about a year ago. But the funding contracts, which need to be in place, are not in place yet because there were 3, or I believe there were 4 agencies that were funded, and one is still has not. approved their funding agreement, and so the county who's administering that is waiting on them. We hope that by next month that will happen, and then the county will be able to take it to their board and get that approved so that we can start requesting funds from that program. Under that program, we have an award for roughly 500,000 for construction stuff. So no construction is occurring right now. It's all design. But we have 650,000 for design work. And so that's the pot of money that we're hoping to get into by the beginning of the year in 2024. You'll notice on the right there's a time between the request and the reimbursement. And again, because we have a certain burn rate as we go through the months, and so we want to make sure we understand when is this money going to be available for us to start recovering, so we don't run into cash flow problems. SRF grant and loan, so about $15 million in grant, and then the rest is a loan. And this got hung up in legal, and so we've been working with our legal counsel, both bond legal counsel and general counsel, to resolve this. But the state is, they've changed a few things about SRF, and I'm not sure why they've done it, but they've changed some of the requirements, and so some of our previous debt issuances, they don't like the way that they're structured, and so we're trying to work through those to make sure that we're able to get this loan. This loan is a low interest loan. It's somewhere around 2%. We have a backup option to go with what's called the WIFIA program, which is a federal program. It's much more flexible in terms of the repayment. For example, the SRF you can't prepay, so that's one thing that is not desirable in our case. If we do get money and we want to prepay it, we would have to figure out some sort of a arbitrage situation where we have something, we pay into a fund, for example, and it's making interest in the amount equal to the loan, and then that gets paid automatically through that fund. But the WIFIA is a little bit more flexible. You can prepay it. You can structure the repayment a little bit unevenly. So if you want to wait for a while before you start paying back, that's an option. But the interest rate on the WIFIA is about 4%, so it's about double with the SRF. So, it's not at its face desirable, but it may become desirable as we work through some of the issues with the SRF loan and some of the restrictions that they're requiring for us to implement in order to qualify for the loan. So that's a little ways out. We don't expect reimbursement from that program. You can see it says 8/1/2024, which is, almost a year away or 10 months away. That's significant. That's a significant period of time. And so, again, we weren't expecting this to happen and these delays to happen. So that's putting a little bit of stress on cash flow. But again, we'll work through it. And the good thing about the WIFIA too is it's quick. Like once we have a letter of interest that was accepted by WIFIA, once we submit an application, it's typically 6 months turnaround before for the first funding. So Sigma monitoring well grants. So as you know, we were awarded that and we've been reimbursed. We typically do quarterly pay requests, but we just had this monitoring well project done, and we expect an invoice from the contractor of about $700,000. And so we're going to do an intermediate request for that so that we can get reimbursed for that fairly quickly. I'm not sure why it says 4/1/23, but we expect to get reimbursed for that fairly quickly. Title 16 grant, so the funding contract was awarded a couple of months ago. It's available now. We're actually preparing a reimbursement. You get 25% of every dollar you spend through that program. We're preparing a request right now, and so we'll, all the way back to 2019, so all expenses. So we'll get, roughly $1 million from that first draw. And then, so then there are the prior costs. Prior costs for SRF are 2.3, but again, that's a little bit out there. So we expect, I don't know what that 150,000 is. We expect, my understanding is we expect around $1 million from SRF, or from Title 16. So that's kind of the roundup of the funding situation. Again, it's a lot of coordination to make sure that we have necessary cash flow before we, get into a situation where we're getting invoices that we can't pay.
Go ahead, Polly.
So the first one, the 500,000, so we hope to know the next month if one of the four has executed the contract with the
Yeah,
county?
3 of the 4 have already executed.
Right.
The last one is, according to the county, is bringing their agreement to the board this month, and then the county will bring their agreement to the county supervisors
Okay.
in November.
So it's not a glitch or anything? It's not being held up for any reason? It's just that that fourth one has been just taken longer?
Yep.
Okay. And then, it's a little bit disappointing to hear that the SRF, either they changed the terms from what we understood them, or they're starting, the criteria is different from
Yeah,
what we...
what they're changing is they want, so historically, we've called debt issued by CCWA or COMB, we've called those O&M costs. So we don't need to raise coverage for those. In other words, we don't have to raise 125% of the value of that debt, because there are different agencies that are, they're issuing debt on their own, through their own name, but the state doesn't like that. They want any member of a JPA to count that as their own debt, and because of that, it puts it on parity with their debt, with SRF debt. So if, for example, we were to default in the existing situation, O&M costs get paid first, then debt gets paid. And so the state is viewing that as their junior to these O&M costs that are, issued through this JPAs.
When will we have a determination if we're going to stick with this one or switch to the...
I would say in the next several weeks, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. So the SRF money, is that due to flow in if this glitch gets over, but not until August 1st of next year?
Yeah, so we have to get a funding agreement in place. So we're in what's called legal concurrence right now. So we're trying to get to the point where both our bond and general counsel and their counsel can agree that everything is good. And so as we work towards that, once that gets resolved, then there's a few other steps that need to go through. But then they have to prepare a funding agreement, and then we have to execute the funding agreement. And so we don't expect that to happen. If everything goes well, we don't expect it to happen till maybe February. Once you get that contract or agreement, then you can make your first request, but then it takes 6 months for that first request to be actually reimbursed. So that's why it's August of 2020.
That is actually the cash flow in
That's
flow.
that's the month eligible where we'll actually get some money back.
Oh, okay. And how far are we dipped into our reserves now to cover this? And I'm sure there's enormous and has a cash flow. But where are we right now? How far are we dipped in?
Our accounting department is doing the analysis on the cash flow, but just from the bills that we received from the various consultants and looking at, the expenses that we project through December, we'll be about $1.5 million into the reserves by December.
Okay, okay, thank you. That answers the question.
Go ahead, Casey.
Is the SRF grant and loan on the same kind of timeline?
Yeah, so that's a good question. This is a carrot that the SRF people have been hanging out. They've been saying, well, if you drop the SRF loan, we can just move forward with the grant. And, you know, there's none of this other stuff that we're dealing with right now will matter. So if we do go with the WIFIA, then the grant will be available pretty quickly. And it's roughly a $15 million grant, and it's a 30%. So every dollar you spend, you get 30 cents.
And so the hang up on I guess I don't understand why the SRF wasn't, essentially secured before we start burning, large sums of cash. Is that a requirement of us having the funding in place with budgeting?
Yeah, so one of the things they needed to see was that rate adoption. Yeah.
And so this is showing we haven't received any funding yet from any of the sources, right?
We've received the Sigma, we've been receiving the Sigma grant, but we are gonna have to put out 700,000 shortly, and so then we'll want to get that back as quickly as possible.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, Bob, so the SRF funding is state funding, right?
Yes.
So either it's 2% or 4%. So do we need to get some help in Sacramento, make sure we get our 2% money, or, I'm just asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty high up that they're wanting, so the state has been also threatening that if you don't move your projects forward, that you're going to get dropped from the list. That's kind of been in the conversation as well. So they gave us a deadline of November 30th. And there is a provision for an extension if we don't make the November 30th date. I think we can make that date. But we just need to get all of the legal opinions to align such that, and we do actually have our financial consultant, Fieldman Rollap, who's done our bond issuances. They're looking at it as well to make sure that there's not so, for example, let's say that let's say we agree to list that as our own debt. And then CCWA, which we have no debt, there is no debt under being collected for in CCWA, just the DWR part, which is okay with them apparently. But let's say CCWA or COMB issue debt in the next 10 years, and we say, we don't want to participate, we're going to take our own debt so that it shows up on our books as, debt that we hold. We now have to collect 125% of that debt payment every year to make that payment. We're going to have Fieldman Rollap look at those scenarios and evaluate the costs and compare the interest rates and tell us whether or not, which is a better deal, I guess. And so that may influence our decision on whether to cut and run on the SRF and go to the WIFIA.
Right, but at this point, you haven't lost the 2% money yet. It sounds like you're still on track to be able to get your documentation in place.
Yeah, I think so. And we've made some strides in terms of working with their council and our council with some solutions, one of which is that in the funding contract, there would be a stipulation that we won't participate in any debt issuance from CCWA or COMB in the future.
Okay. Thank you. So we're done with item 7D. Then we go on to item number 8, director reports. 8A, recycled water committee meeting. That was Casey and myself. Anything you want to add to that, or we pretty well? We reviewed the contract between both the sanitation district, both operating and the contract, right? That's what we reviewed. And I think Bob is moving in the right direction, make sure we're well protected. So
yeah, so we will probably either the next board meeting or the one after that be talking about the joint exercise of powers agreement as well as the lease agreement between the water district and the CSD. Those are agreements that we'll need to have in place for this funding agreement. So they don't necessarily need to be in place before November 30th, but they do need to be in place before we sign the funding agreement.
Okay. Any questions? Then we move on to item number 8B, Strategic Water Management Committee meeting. There was both Shirley and myself. And I think Mesa pretty well covered everything that
Yep.
we discussed, so I think it's pretty well what it is. Then we move on to number 8C, Comb Board meeting, September 25th. Polly?
Great, thank you. So we gave the verbal report on the administrative committee that I reviewed with all of you at the previous meeting. I gave the personnel handbook updates to Norma, and on the Oak Tree Committee, they published their annual report, which was good because it included the sunsetting of the program in 2025, so everybody was happy with that. We passed the Resolution 793, which was the second amendatory contract with the Bureau of Reclamation for the transferred project works, and I think I signed that recently, about maybe a week ago, 10 days ago. Again, we updated the personnel employee policy. We approved additional spending of $19,000 for the 2023 storm damage and the debris removal because more was necessary. It just was more than had been expected for San Roque, Toro, and Laurel. And we also approved an additional, it was initially at $48,500 and will likely go to about 60 or 62, so a little bit of an increase for the Laurel Stilling Well debris removal. Case talked about this last month. I talked about it the month before because the Bureau of Reclamation had counted that as a Category 1 must fix by the end of August. It took a little bit more time, but we have it done. And then in the general manager report, the water rates from the Bureau was discussed and out at $1.9 million, which was for a normal year, which is what within what Edward and Janet had estimated. Let's see. And also, there was only a marginal increase for the Aqua JPIA health insurance, so that was good news too. JPIA is still considered the most competitive option anywhere. I think that we would agree with that. And we are kicking off the technical session for the Safety of Dams contract renewal. We asked the Bureau of Reclamation to be sure that take another look at all the costs to be sure that there's no double dipping between the water rates and between that contract renewal. The engineering report did highlight a little bit of a delay down here because Caltrans had not, they had declined a permit. Do you want to say anything else about that? I just wasn't sure.
No, I think that's accurate.
Okay. And then on the fish, the big discussion was that the Bureau of Reclamation, after for a few months having their releases at 40 CFS, highly more than they needed to be, had a ramp down plan to 10. So the fish division is carefully working with the Bureau to make sure that they're monitoring the fish as these decreases go from 40 to 10. Obviously, we were all concerned about that and how it was that high, and they kept saying, oh, we're trying to just make sure we have ample amount with NIMS and with CDFW, but it certainly was an awful lot. We all agreed, but we also knew that the GMs were discussing it. Is that a correct statement? Thank you.
The GMs did met with the county water agency to discuss that item. And we all agreed that we would set up an operational meeting with the Bureau to discuss what the protocols are to adjust those flows. The flows were significantly lower when we checked during that meeting. So they are ramping down. And these are fish release flows, just for background. And under Table 2 of the water rights order that was issued in 2019, after a wet year, you're required for a certain number of months to release 45 CFS. And that 45 CFS and all of the target numbers are measured at the 154 crossing of the San Ynez River, so it's not right out of the actual dam. So there's some loss that occurs, from the release point at the dam to the crossing. And so I think the Bureau, maybe as a precaution, are very conservative about how much they're releasing. It's so much so that it seems unreasonable at times. And so that's really I think the thing that the managers are wanting to discuss with the Bureau. And so we have some data that we will utilize to demonstrate that, they're being probably overly conservative.
Great. Thank you. That
Can I-
concludes, oh, sure.
Can I ask a question about the 45 CFS being conservative? Does that mean too much water is being released or
Yes.
too little?
Yes. They're trying to comply with a water rights order and a biological opinion for the steelhead. And there's not really an incentive for the Bureau of Reclamation to risk anything, so they just open up the valve such that it releases enough water and well over that to make it to 154 and meet the target. But the people, the agencies that pay for the project and utilize that water are the ones who pay the price for that being too conservative.
Okay, thank you.
So they were ramping down to 10 from the 40, and that's where it was at the stage of the meeting. So we knew you all were in discussion and would figure out a plan there. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Polly. Then we got 8D, CCWA Board Meeting, September 28th, 2023. Shirley?
Okay, yes, we started off, we were in Buellton, started off in closed session, and nothing to report from that. And the consent calendar we went through. And, yes, we have a new CCWA staff member, which we'd been looking for a long time, is a new safety officer, Brenda McGuire, and she has some background in water, and like me, she seemed very excited to be working with us, and just that water is something special to be working with, and and she's new, but I think she's already been two months, but they were looking for someone like this for a couple of years. So, and then we had a DWR energy presentation by Jonathan Young, and the energy manager of the state water contractors. And as you know, the state water contractors are the 27 out of the 29 customers that use and buy and pay for the state water project, aqueducts and all that infrastructure and pumps and everything else. And that's not including the federal. But anyway, so when he talks about energy used for moving water, that's just the state side. It's not not the federal. But anyway, it was really, it was really an amazing presentation. And I thought, and I asked him, I said, well, this is really amazing, because he's talking about the amount of water used and switching from renewable to gas. Gas right now is where we produce our energy, and it's actually more localized. And if you, switch to the renewable, then you're paying for transmission lines from Wyoming and maybe New Mexico, and the wind farms there, and the wind farms off the coast, etc. So I was wondering, why is the customer, they're buying the state water, they don't run the project, then they have no decision-making, really, to run that project. And why, he looks like he could run the whole project as far as providing power for the state contract. But it's really, I learned more about it, and it's really a joint effort. And, the state water contracts do have a roadmap for energy, efficient use of energy for the future. And natural gas generation is the load centers. And it takes 2,826 megawatts of power to move 1 acre-feet of water through the coastal branch. because we have a 1,500-foot lift there, so it's kind of expensive water. I mean, that was the bottom line for us versus even maybe Los Angeles or some other places. It's pretty expensive water. So that was very informative. And the water supply situation report is, well, the interesting thing about that is it's, there's plenty of water, as you know, and regarding, any possible deals to sell water, we as members, Carpinteria and Goleta and Santa Barbara, et cetera, we might go through the Central Coast Water Authority if you wanted to sell. Some people were interested in wanting to sell, earlier it was maybe some interest in buying, and now it's nobody's interest in buying, so no buyers. And it looks like San Luis will fill and spill again in November. And just based on a lot of equations, how much they're releasing, how much the snow is melting, where it's going, but that, they say, is pretty much for sure. And what's kind of interesting in that is that San Luis did spill, with the big rains, and as we all know, spilling, in San Luis's case, it doesn't really mean the water goes over the dam. It's a paperwork sort of thing. But it means the water's lost. If you stored water there, and we did lose water, you can lose thousands of acre feet of water. But the interesting thing is that CCWA members took more in the free water when they spill than they have water they can't deliver to anyone, and they call it Article 51 water. And it's in the system, and if you want it, you can have it, for free, except for you have to pay the cost, et cetera. So the interesting thing is that we took more free water from Article 51 than we lost from when I say we, I mean the whole CCWA. So that was interesting. And then, so the other thing, the main thing was a report on the Devil's Pump Station breakdown. As you know, there was an explosion there. There was a short. We still don't have the forensic report on that, but it's supposed to be up and running. It was partially up and running pretty quick, and that's the other thing. If there's Article 51 water that we want to take when San Luis spills, if we have no way to get it on the coastal branch, then we're not in a good position. So yesterday, I think, was the day they said they were going to be up and running again. So I haven't had an update on that, and they have not had a chance to look at the full forensic report, so we don't really know quite yet what caused the explosion. And we're working on the Warren Act renewal. Now I guess it's due in a year. That's the contract we have with the Bureau in order for us to utilize Lake Kachuma for our water needs. And it was very interesting. The legislative report, which is usually like this. Oh, I meant to bring it, as a show and tell, but it's like it's not an inch thick, and that's all the different things in Sacramento government legally, bills, acts, whatever they are, concerning water that's on the board right now. So it's a lot of them, and that's interesting because right after a big rainy year, that there would be so many. So anyway, okay, and that is my report. If there's any questions?
Thank you, Shirley. And then we go on to item number 8E, Aqua, public bidding, best practices workshop. Shirley?
Okay, yeah. I was kind of hoping for something more of a general principle, based on principle, what's the purpose of the bidding and things to watch out for, or that kind of a level. But it was useful. What the presentation was more about is a laundry list of different things, forms and the public contract code, let's see, and some of the major things is all bidders should have the same information, a level playing field, and, you respond to the bidder and you set up your priorities when you send out for bid. And usually it's the lowest cost, but it also could have something to do with quality as well. And she went through the bid protests, legal channels, which I didn't even know about. If you put something out to bid and you choose, a contractor, and there's another contractor that bids, it doesn't agree, you can have bid protests. And what is public document, public information, and what isn't. And also that the, $200,000 is, you have to go into a formal bid process, and under that could use informal, and what's the difference, and there's a few different avenues you can go through. So, and it's very interesting, CUPPCCA. She couldn't have told me what that stands for, but it's California Public Contract Codes. So that's in play, and this is something the board members ought to know too, that, that all these things are what we're doing. Let's see. And Department of Industrial Relations is another two legal entities that are involved in the bidding process. So I wish she would have maybe gone into some more case histories, or that's always for especially someone who's not into the the bid form, this form /398 and all that. But I did get a pretty good idea of the overall thing, and I hope it works, and I hope our agency can carry through this bidding process, especially when we get into CAP, and especially it's most applicable for the construction bids, the construction contract bids. So, thank you very much. I'm a little more educated on this now.
Thanks, Shirley. And then we got number 9, General Manager's Report, none. Item 10, there is no closed session items. Then we got item 11, consider dates and items for the agenda for the Carpinteria Valley Water District Board meeting of October 25th, 2023 at 5:30 at Carpinteria City Hall, 5775 Carpinteria Avenue, Carpinteria, California. Go ahead,
I'd like an update on the CAP funding that you reviewed, especially if we might have an update from the county and what ends up taking place on that. Thank you.
Okay, then I like to adjourn this meeting in memory of Mac Brown, who just passed away. So, meeting adjourned.
Ooh, and let me dream a dream or two. Sing me to sleep, lullaby of the leaves. I'm breezing along with the breeze, hearing a song through the trees. That pine melody caressing the shore, familiar to me. I heard it